Welcome, everyone, to the Deloitte AI Institute webcast, where we're so happy that you can join us here for our new session on strengthening your data foundation in AI. I'm pleased to have our partner kick us off for this session, Kevin Lavin. And yes, this session will be available en français. If you so choose, this session is going to be recorded and available in your language of preference and posted to our AI Institute webpage. So with that, I hand it over to you, Kevin, to kick us off for this session.
Thank you, Aisha. Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for joining Deloitte AI Institute Canada for today's panel discussion on strengthening your data foundations for AI. While this event is a webcast, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on today. Deloitte Canada has offices with representation across most of the country. We acknowledge that our offices reside on traditional, treaty, and unceded territories as part of Turtle Island, and is still home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Today, we have a panel discussion for you with speakers from the energy and resources sector, which is focused on strengthening your data foundations. My name is Kevin. I'm a partner in Omnia AI, which is Deloitte Canada's AI practice. As part of our data science team, I have the opportunity to serve energy and resources clients across Canada, helping them to build AI models, machine learning systems, and data systems that support those. Over my 20-year career, I've had the opportunity to provide analytics and AI to utilities in a variety of technical and business roles. And over that time, I've had the chance to see the use of AI evolve and change. It began early in my career as an academic and research domain, and slowly shifted to a specialist application where niche technology companies would use AI as part of their offerings or part of their products. Over time, we've seen the use of AI grow more broad, from something that only a few companies use to one that is on the radar and being looked at by most companies across industries. Broad usage began with what I would describe as the age of POCs, proof of concepts. People wanted to use a curated data set to see whether they could train a model to do certain things, to predict, to forecast, to categorize, to do things that could be useful in a business context. And for the most part, these POCs were technically successful. People were able to build algorithms that could do a lot of great things that could have a real impact on business. With the end of the POC, broad usage began there. This was done on curated data sets, as I said. I joined Omnia as part of Deloitte in 2018. And around this time, the age of the proof of concepts was ending, and it was shifting to what I would call the age of use cases. The age of use cases changed the focus from, could we make an algorithm do something, to, can we actually use this to drive a business benefit there? And this was something that I learned as I shifted from technology companies to coming to Deloitte, is that a use case is not a technical problem. A use case is a business problem aiming to make a business impact. An algorithm alone, a model by itself, doesn't solve the problem. A use case is a business problem, and it needs a business-oriented solution. And AI is just one piece of that puzzle. What you see on the screen here is something called the Insights-Driven Organization Framework. This is a framework that helps frame analytics problems, whether it be a real AI problem or a business insights problem, as a business challenge, a way to impact a business with it through a process, starting by defining a vision, building a team, then moving through the complex step where in parallel, you're finding and identifying the use cases, running pilots, and building the foundation that will allow you to go to the next stage of deploying at scale there. This allows organizations to go for quick wins through pilots and first deployments while they're building a foundation. And it's an approach that we've seen lead to a lot of success. But it's a challenging approach because it needs a strong foundation to be built while you're delivering in order to succeed. The next slide has a poll that I'd like to introduce to all of our respondents here and viewers on this webinar. The question is, where are you in your data foundation journey? Where are you on this journey towards building a solid foundation for deploying AI and analytics across your organization? So I'm going to wait for a moment, as the survey should be popping up on your screen right now, and each of you can answer the question, and we'll see what the results come in. It's been interesting to run this and similar polls over time and see how the responses have changed over the years as organizations slowly move through the process of defining visions, building out ecosystems, strengthening core capabilities, and more organizations move towards deploying at scale. So I'll give a few more moments for folks to answer the questions, and I believe we should start to see the results popping up soon. Okay, we've got some good responses coming in now. So we've got a lot of folks at defining the vision. That's a core first step, and it's an important one. If you skip that step, there's a risk of giving technical people a chance to go down a rabbit hole and find a solution in search of a problem. Building an ecosystem obviously is critical. There's a lot of different parts to that, as you're going to see. Strengthening core capabilities, another huge step. What we're seeing here is a real dominance of people in the early and foundational stages. And this is not a surprise. This is a good reflection of what I've seen in my time with Deloitte serving the industries there. Not a lot of organizations have reached deploying at scale yet, but most organizations are on the path towards that. That brings us to the question of foundations there, which is a great way to shift to the next slide. So the IDO framework, the Insights-Driven Organization framework, outlines a whole collection of capabilities, the foundational capabilities that you need to succeed. There's a lot of these. There's strategy, there's people, there's process, there's data, and there's technology as well. Today, we're going to be focusing on the data pillar of this framework there. The data pillar is where you move essentially from proof of concepts to deployment at scale. In a proof of concept, you're generally working with a curated data set that's been manually prepared. It doesn't need to connect into live data systems. The data has been manually cleansed. Everything's been carefully prepared to make it easy to solve the problem. For a real world deployment, you need a full data system here. It needs a lot more. You need sensors, you need software systems, you need processes, you need data, you need your teams to be well prepared to set a foundation. And as all these things come together, especially as all your different data sources come together in one environment, there's a growing need for governance. This need for governance is something we're seeing more and more organizations realize is central, and something that we've seen central to organizations that have succeeded to getting to deployment at scale is they've made governance central. Companies are slowly coming around to this need. In a recent Deloitte Debriefs polling survey, we found that organizational insights on key business priorities and data governance was the topic of the survey. In the survey, only 11% of respondents indicated that they have strong governance structure, and only 10% believe that data governance is a key benefit to the organization. This is a difficult thing to see the value of data governance because it feels like an administrative step. But something you can see in this slide is a different way of thinking about it. It introduces data governance as a fulcrum around which all of the different data management capabilities can operate. It brings them all together and provides a centralized point of contact and centralized approach to making sure that all of these different pieces and elements of data foundations come together in a way that will actually facilitate deployment at scale when the time is right for that. This is one way to think about data foundations, but it's not the only way. And as we move into talking about data foundations, I'm ready to introduce our panel for today. This panel includes people from industry as well as experts from Deloitte to speak to you about the topic of strengthening your data foundations in preparation for AI. We have three panelists here today. Herman Ng is the Senior Director of Data Innovations and Decision Intelligence at Algonquin Liberty that serve electric, gas, and water to over 1 million North American customer connections, largely in the United States and also in Canada and overseas. He brings over 15 years of expertise in strategic initiatives, advanced analytics, and operations management to support Liberty's journey to become more data-driven in decision-making. Previously in telecommunications, gaming, and HVAC services, Herman successfully led complex cross-functional initiatives, including the design and implementation of major productivity and organizational change programs. Herman is a professional engineer and a chartered director in corporate governance. Kathleen Story is the manager of enterprise content management at Pembina Pipeline Corporation. She has worked in the public and private sectors, including over 10 years of experience with information management and governance systems across the energy, resources, and industrial sector. She has extensive experience fostering awareness of information assets across enterprises and in covering strategic opportunities to realize the benefits of data foundation frameworks at scale. Raj Debath leads the data governance community of practice for Omnia AI. He leads both advisory and technology-based operationalization engagements in data governance and data management for clients across industries, particularly in the energy and resources sector. Raj helps his clients manage their data assets efficiently by leveraging enterprise data management capabilities through a robust data governance framework to generate analytics and AI-based insights. With over 20 years of experience in technology consulting, Raj has helped organizations embed analytics, data, and reasoning into their decision-making processes. He has worked with clients in Canada, the US, UK, Germany, and India, and in the energy resources, financial service, public sector, and retail domains. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Audrey Ancion, the Deloitte AI Institute Canada leader, who will be your moderator today. Audrey?
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks a lot for kicking us off. And thank you to our esteemed panelists for being with us today to talk about data foundations. I would love to share with you the questions that we're going to cover today, or that we prepared, to remind you that in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, you're also invited to contribute to this conversation. Get some of your questions answered by some of our panelists. Given the statistics Kevin has shared, I would be surprised if none of you in this audience isn't, I want to say, working actively on their data foundation. So really looking forward to your questions. In terms of what we will cover for the first part, as you formulate your own questions, we will talk about where our panelists see where they are in their journey and how they see their North Star. We will talk about what building data foundations mean and how to get started. There are so many priorities. How do you know where to start? And last but not least, we'll talk about challenges and how to circumvent those on the data journey. So let me start with you, Kathleen. At Pembina, where would you say you're at in your data foundation journey? And have you been in a state, have you defined a North Star for your data foundation efforts?
Thanks, Audrey. In terms of where we are today on our data foundation journey, we are in year one of a master data management or master data governance implementation. And that's not to say that there wasn't a lot of work happening in the data space before we started on this particular journey. A lot of folks at Pembina have been using data for a very long time. They've been thinking about opportunities and doing a lot of really good work with their data. But in this specific journey for master data governance, we're looking at a technical implementation for master data technology. We are using Informatica, but equally as important, we're building out the governance structure to fully support that technical implementation over the long term. And that's where I've been most engaged in the organization. So when we think about our governance structure, obviously we have for our project governance a steering committee, a working group, and those bodies will continue into the sustainment phase for master data governance. But what we're also doing, and I'm actively involved with, is building a data integrator group. When we see data today, there has been a lot of work at Pembina with folks who have done things in their own areas. So for example, supply chain has a group that's very focused on data work. Our asset information folks, they do a lot of work with data, and they're doing a lot of really good work in their groups. But how do we bring that to the enterprise level and get people talking across the enterprise? And that I think will be really critical to our success long term, to help people understand where data dependencies lie and how do you work together for a broader enterprise outcome than what we have today. And, in terms of that journey, what's been really critical is just having those conversations with people and being willing to have them more than once. It's a big change for the organization, but really building that governance foundation, I think, will be critical to our long-term success. And when we think of our long-term success and our North Star, it is really building that enterprise view of data. And in our organization, we would think of that as a PEMINA first approach to managing our data and governing our data over the long term. And that also aligns with our corporate values. And if we get that enterprise view, what it really allows us to do is use our data to make reliable, data-driven decisions that will help us guide us for the long term. And also, PEMINA is a growth company. So when we think of doing acquisitions, and we're actively going through one right now, we do a lot of manual work with our data today. And what we'd like to get to is a place where we have the standards, we have the foundations and the processes in place. We are able to ingest that data a lot more easily, and it'll be a lot more useful for our personnel as they start to engage with it.
Fantastic, Kathleen. Thanks for highlighting for us the journey you've started, where you're at in terms of your technology implementation, also recognizing the need for a governance structure, that integrator role, which is quite unique, helping identify the interdependencies between different data domains. Really love that you're actively thinking about that, and also that you're anchoring your efforts on, past efforts. Like you mentioned, people have been working with data for a while, and so it's important to take root in what existed before, but also have a plan for the future, which it's also anchored in your strategy of growth. Thanks a lot for that great overview. Herman, how about you at Liberty Utilities? Where would you say you are at in your data foundations journey?
Yeah, we're in year 2 of our journey, so still pretty early stages. And we have a broad vision. Our North Star has been defined in that we really want data to be embedded in every decision, every interaction, every process. And we want these processes to be delivered in real time through flexible data stores, enable integrated, ready-to-use data for our citizen data scientists, right? And where we're at now is we're starting to really look into data management, as Kevin alluded to, where we're prioritizing and automating for privacy, security, and resiliencies, right? We want to make sure that, especially in our industry, the safety and the safeguarding of information of our customers, of our infrastructure is key. And as we have the vision in migrating towards, evolving towards AI and machine learning and other more advanced analytics capabilities, the observability and transparency is really key. And this is where the foundation elements comes in. So our vision, we have a directional understanding of where we like to go. We're really more in the phase now in building the team, and in the age of use cases, we are rigorously prioritizing use cases in a portfolio basket type approach where we can diversify our risk and rewards holistically across the analytics portfolio.
Nice. Thanks, Herman, for highlighting that. Kevin spoke about, it's hard with data efforts to showcase the value. So selecting and curating an active basket of use cases is really critical, right, to generate both that those quick wins, but also sustain and maintain momentum over time. So really love that you're sharing that with us. Raj, as a Deloitte subject matter expert in data governance and data management, what would be your guidance to folks that are on the call that are in the process of doing these many things, right? Building a team, building processes, increasing, like managing their toolkit, if I can put it this way, while also at the same time potentially considering technology platforms to help them. What should they keep in mind?
Wonderful question, Audrey. And I'll just apologize to start with. My voice might sound a little strange. Not the best weather under which I am. I have worked with different clients who are in their different phases of the data foundation journey. So I'll focus on the North Star part, and that should drive us in terms of where we should focus. I think the North Star should be far away. And I just came out of a workshop where we were guiding our partner client on their platform modernization journey. And I'll describe that approach. That might be a right answer to this. What we are trying to do is they're moving to a modernized platform. Instead of just finding, and we focus a lot in our day-to-day challenges, instead of focusing too much into that, let's look at what is the target state, what good looks like. I would rather say what best looks like. What we did in that workshop is showcased a few of in the areas that they have prioritized, few of how things should look like in 3 years. It's a journey, right? It's not going to end in next year. And if you are building a foundation that is only good for next year, then we are not doing things in the right way. Think about 5 years later. What are the things that you want to have? What are the capabilities that you want to build? And find the right tool that will do that. How do you do that? You can work with leading vendors in each of these areas. They will be very happy to show you their capabilities, where they shine. There are a lot of machine learning, deep learning driven data quality improvement tools. We still are stuck with rule-based data quality improvement. So we need to focus on things that actually will be day-to-day, everyday thing in 3 years. A lot of us are not aware of it. So the best way to do is define your target state, see what are the capabilities you need, what good looks like for those areas. Based on that, go from right to left and define your journey. This is what I want to achieve in next 1 year, in 3 year, and 5 year. But with those aspirations, what is life without a little bit of a dream?
Thanks for highlighting the need to have a long-term vision, a view, and the opportunity to work backwards from that, Raj. Really appreciate it. Thank you. To help our panelists answer question 2, I would love to ask you, Atif, if you can just go back to the wheel, the data governance wheel. And I would love to ask each of our panelists, as we think about building our data foundations, how did you prioritize what to focus on first? Kathleen, can I have your take for what it means at Pembina to translate this into actions to operationalize some of this? So you're on mute.
Sorry. When we look at this picture in terms of determining our priorities, it really goes back to thinking what the needs of the organization are and how do we get there. And, when we look at our organization, they really are looking to use data effectively, have it accessible. So there's more of a self-service model around data. And, thinking about the data quality that goes with it. So having the right standards in place, the right processes in place to really make that happen. And when we think of the technical implementation that we're doing, instead of going for the most complex data objects first, we purposely started this year with some of they're not easy, but easier ones, so that we could tackle things like the data quality, the accessibility, and the availability of our data, and get some lessons learned, and then build on those as we go through our journey. So
setting realistic goals based on needs from the business. Fantastic. Yes. Love it. Harman, do you have a different perspective, different view, complementary insight?
It's pretty complementary, right? I think the business challenge, focusing on that is key, because you really want to make sure that the output of any data foundational work, any analytics delivery is really going to be timely and relevant in helping essentially to make our business partners' life easier. Where we focus on on this picture here, we've started out really focusing on the data access, security, and privacy for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. And master data management is where we have also put a focus on, understanding that we can't really do data management for everything all at once. Like Kathleen, data quality is top of mind for us as well, because whether you're doing reporting and BI, or eventually doing data sharing with third parties, or just even training your advanced analytics model, the old saying that is still relevant, garbage in, garbage out. We really need to make sure that happens. And I just want to maybe add on to it that data governance, like a lot of different things, it's a cultural undertaking, a cultural change, right? We can have the best platforms and tools in place, but if the culture of how we collect data, how the data gets into our system, it's not really being appreciated, the value of having those done first time right, then we'll just frankly have a lot of expensive investments sitting there and not really sweating those to their fullest potential.
Yeah, for sure. And let me build on that point, Herman, that data governance is also a cultural transformation. If you think about building executive buy-in, but also anchoring your program and efforts in grassroots, right? From a bottoms-up perspective, assuming both are eventually needed for a successful and vibrant program, but what would be your guidance to people on this panel, on this call, for how to get started?
Well, I think getting started, I like to think of it as you have to go from the top and go from grassroots, right? It's not a unidirection. It sort of have to be starting from both directions and meeting halfway, because in reality, you would need executives, senior executive sponsorship on this being top of mind. And actually, what's interesting at Liberty is our CEO in his personal scorecard has big data deliveries on his personal scorecard. So this is really showing the organization the importance of advancing our data journey, right? Now, on the other hand, with the working team, it's really important as a data function, as an analytics function, where we think of ourselves more as an extension to the business partners, as opposed to being the quant type where we are just really running a lot of different experimentations without really tying to what the business outcomes that people are looking for. And over time, what we've been able to do especially this past 12 months, because we're in year 2, year 1 was mostly building out some of the infrastructure, is that we were so embedded in our business teams on the use cases that we're working on with them that we really support them. When we provide analytics readout to senior executives, it's the business partners. They are the ones who are actually sharing what the outcomes are, and we're really playing an enabling role to get them to where they need to be, because this is where you can get the positive feedback, the momentum, in having people seeing what the analytics team can do beyond just automating maybe some of your existing reports, and really getting them to trust you and to work alongside together, collaborating. And I think that's really where the magic starts to happen.
Thanks, Herman, for highlighting that the role of business partners and your team's enabling role there. Kathleen, if I can ask you to contribute on the topic of cultural transformation. You mentioned a steering committee group, a working committee group. You mentioned also the business integrator role. What has been your driving direction or your guiding principles to make sure that we have the right stakeholders engaged throughout?
From the start of the project, and even before the project officially kicked off, there was a lot of communication, a lot of one-to-one conversations to start to build a consistent understanding of what data governance is, what master data is versus transactional data, and helping people to see what potential outcomes can come out of the project. It's one thing to do the project and to build the foundation, but then how does that enable the business over the long term? So that's when we think of the cultural transformation, that's where we started, and it doesn't just stop. So we've started the project, we have good traction, we're doing really well in the organization, but those conversations are ongoing. So at steering committee, there's a lot of key messaging that happens, at every single meeting. The same with our leader forums. We also have an optimization change network at Pembina where we've presented multiple times. And again, it's being able to communicate those key messages over and over again so that people start to hear it, they start to really think about it, and then can hopefully talk about it. So as we go through the project and come out to our sustainment phase and model, people really do understand what master data is. They do understand what data governance is and how it can enable them. It's not just a fancy governance structure that we've put in place because we need to have something. It's real, it helps the business, and it drives value for the business. So it's really all comes down to communication at the end of the day in terms of where we are right now.
Thanks for clarifying that, Kathleen, and kudos to you for having started even with one-on-one conversations, which are sometimes needed to answer basic questions or make people feel safe, because it's hard to come out as it's hard to recognize sometimes we don't know some of the fundamentals as business leaders. I wonder, Raj, if you could give us your perspective on what works, what doesn't work when it comes to cultural transformation, making sure we engage stakeholders in our data governance effort.
Absolutely. I was just listening to the two other very esteemed panel members, and I think I learned a lot. And there is a pattern that emerges in front of your eyes. 5 years ago, energy and resources sector was not as mature as it is, at least in their culture. I have seen the change in front of my eyes. Like unlike FIs, the financial institutes are always very prepared because of their regulatory needs. Now, coming back to the culture aspect, I think culture is not one thing. It's, in my view, 3 types. One is the top tier, the senior executives who are giving you the budget. At today's day, I think, at least in this industry, energy and resources, they're pretty aligned. They understand what it is. But there are 2 other layers. One are the key bodies who will participate in your data governance journey, such as risk committee, architecture review board, your ELTs, all these bodies. And then there is, the users, the consumers of data and analytics. I have seen 2 types of challenges. Sometimes those bodies who are like VP, senior, like senior manager, VP to director, that level, in your playbook that you have defined for your data governance journey, you have to have very clear and tangible participation from these bodies. Often, because these are mature people, we just leave it to them. You're a risk committee, you will know what to do. You have to have, they should have a skin in the game. That's what inspires them. And for the consumer layer, I think the important part is to change the culture from data governance is often looked at as auditors. We are actually facilitators. We are here to help you, not to check if you're doing things right. That switch, that shift in culture has to happen. And it can only happen in one way, in my humble opinion, is to show them, is by showing them the benefit that they can get out of it. I am doing our work in this way. This new solution will change the way. So yes, I have to invest some time to learn with the new ways of working, but it will save me 20 hours of work every month. That is inspiring enough. And if we take that path, the end goal, as radical as it may sound, is to have data governance as a core function, just the way we have finance or HR. That day is my dream where data governance is considered as a core function.
True, I hear you, Raj. Sometimes we see some of our clients being requested to do that off the side of their desk, and that's very hard to give it, because on the other hand, I'm hearing from you resilience, rigor, discipline, tons of communication. So all those require dedicated efforts. I do hear you on that. I'm wondering, Atif, if we can go to our 3rd question, where we have more time to talk about challenges, and we can also frame them as enablers. I'm wondering, Kathleen and Herman, if you could talk about challenges, and maybe there are some that are industry specific. Both of you are in the energy and utility sector. So maybe talk to us beyond the cultural and people challenges. what have been some challenges you have encountered, and how did you circumvent those? Kathleen, let's start with you.
Sure, there's a couple that come to mind. One is around, data quality and process and elevating that more to an enterprise level. And I kind of talked about this in the first question where, there are groups in our organization that have been actively working with their data, thinking about it, thinking about what good quality data is and how it can be used. But where we are now, it's how do we start to bring all of those groups together? And we have had success throughout the year, but it's not been easy. It's taken a lot of conversations. It's taken a lot of time to bring people to more of that enterprise level and start having those conversations across the different groups to build that understanding. So that's one challenge. And a second challenge is also, it's even before we started on our project, but thinking about why a foundation is important. So in our culture, at Pembina's culture, it's very entrepreneurial, it's very collaborative, it's very results driven. So people have been using data for reporting. There are some predictive analytics solutions in place. And it's very easy to say, well, I can do what I need. I'm getting results here. I can make my decisions. But there's also then been those underlying questions around, well, that data was hard to get to, or it took me a long time to get the data, or is that really the right data that I should be looking at? So taking that very, entrepreneurial approach, and it's very innovative approach, but then taking a step back to say, we really like this kind of work, but how do we make it really sustainable over the long term? And we don't want to stop the really good ideas from coming along and moving ahead, because they really do drive a lot of good work in the organization. But again, it's taking that step back to say, what do we need to make this even better over the long term? How do we improve self-service for the business? How do we make sure our data is fully available and it's accurate and it's reliable and there are good standards in place to govern it?
Thank you for that, Kathleen. I wonder if we can go to you, Herman, and in the meantime, if I can encourage our three panelists to review Larissa's question on reducing the number of policies with regards to governing data. So I'll let you review that, but for now, Herman, maybe you can talk to us about the challenges beyond the people and culture challenges we already discussed. What would you say were your top 2 or 3 challenges at Liberty Utilities in standing up and scaling your data governance efforts?
What I find fascinating in this industry is the sheer variety of details in the data sources that we have. I mean, I used to think there are quite a bit of variety in some of the other verticals I was previously in at, but now we get to the very basic, right? Delivering energy to customers, and you have infrastructure information, operational information, you have environment information, and just trying to collect all of those, and to Kathleen's point, because just historically, the data set sometimes it's not completed, it's not complete, and sometimes you have the data sources and it wasn't really turned up to the right verbals or resolution level, and you only start to encounter it when you start doing data exploration. So just being able to be adaptive and trying to find quick wins through starting first with working with what you've got, and then encouraging our business partners to really see where in the haystack we should really start to focus on, more laser focus, more surgically, to get to those next set of quick wins. I think that has been the challenge, because it's more than just having a priority matrix where you can just start filling out, scoring them. It's much more around just balancing what would really feel engaged and aligned with the problems that our partners have always been having, and without the data piece here, they have been not been able to get to the next level. and balancing that with what's the art of possible, with what I sometimes call a low or no IT approach that we can get things started and build momentum. So I think just finding those right use cases, collaborating with the business to really balance the feasibility of it, the speed to which we can deliver, and that's been, so far it's been the most challenging ones that I've been at here in the energy vertical.
Thanks, Herman, for sharing those challenges candidly. Raj, would love to have your Deloitte perspective on the challenge that was shared as part of the Q&A around having too many policies and how to go about that. But also if you could say a few words on selecting the right use cases. Herman talked about, it goes beyond the simple placing on a 2x2 matrix. Would love to know what your perspective and experiences has been on that. And then next I'll come to you, Kathleen, and I'll ask you the same. How do you, what is the process that you follow to find those golden use cases or relevant use cases? How do you conduct that process with the business? So now, Raj, talk to us about number of policies, how to manage that.
So I think the question is valid, the concern about the fatigue. I have heard this and it's not uncommon. I'm sure almost everybody in the room would agree. The challenge, the true challenge is actually not having too many policies or too less. I have seen organizations with almost no written policies. Trust me, that's not a better place you want to go either. The problem is policies are written on Word and they end up as shelfwares. So a lot of effort goes into it by writing a 40-page document, which at the end will end up on a shelf and no one is going to use it. So instead of focusing on that, I think the key is how do you operationalize these policies? If you have a strategy in place for that, that works. And I'll give you one quick example. If you're talking about master data or data quality related policies, whichever way you define it, translate it through business rules and data quality rules. That is, your focus of writing this policy is to improve your quality, improve the quality of your master data. The only way to do that, at least in the traditional way, is having data quality rules implemented through some tools or whichever way you do it to measure how good the data is, where you should focus, where the issues are recurring and critical, and then take action on this. Once this is done with a RACI, that is, if there is a data quality issue, who's informed, who has to be responsible. If your RACI is well-defined and people are attached to it through their operating model, people will start seeing the benefits of this automation. And as a result, it will not remain as a, like a 40-page document. In terms of how many policies should have, just to wrap the answer is, I think you should focus on what industry you are in, what is your key goal. If you're in healthcare, you cannot get rid of data privacy and security policy. If you're in retail, data quality and master data, because you will have hundreds and thousands of duplicate item or product data. So think from that perspective. If you have to pick one policy, that should be your key one.
Thanks for that, Raj. Maybe I can stop here and maybe ask Kathleen and Herman to comment on their own policies. Would you mind sharing with the audience what kind of policies you do have in place or what you might be working on next?
Sure. So, we are still early in our journey and we're still figuring out what we would call them standards in our organization, but what standards that we need to have in place. Some groups do have some standards to govern their data. So for example, in our supply chain group, they have some standards. In our asset area, they have some standards. And then in other areas, they haven't had the opportunity to develop those standards. But what we want to start to do as we build our data integrator group is really think about those standards and what is required to govern our master data. Like to Raj's point, what do we really need to have in place? What industry standards are there that we not necessarily have to meet, but maybe we should meet, or that can help us have good quality data over the long term. And the other thing we want to do is look at those standards across the different groups or across the different types of data objects to say, again, where are the dependencies? Are there things that we have to think about? If we change one standard, is there an implication downstream that we should catch ahead of time before it starts to happen, and then we have to do a bunch of rework. So that's where we are today. So it's really thinking about what do we need to have in place to be successful. We don't have a set number defined.
Sounds good, Kathleen. I do love how you're calling them standards. Helping raise the standards. Policies can sometimes have a negative connotation, but Herman, I'm all ears. At Liberty Utilities, do you have policy standards, regulations? How do you call how you set guidelines for what great looks like?
Yeah, so we are a work in progress. We have definitely in place now our data classification, going back to the point where the privacy and security piece is paramount for us as how we prioritize in our foundational journey. And on top of that, we take a two-pronged approach. As we are migrating legacy system into newer systems, over there, we'll make sure that we're standing up master data management. So the key fields, attributes, features, whichever term you like to use, we make sure that those will have a good systemic approach in managing the lineage, the visibility of how all the data flow happens there. And then in parallel, as we are enabling new business use cases, we also make sure that as part of our life cycle in the project, whether it's security by design, privacy by design, we start right at the front of the workflow where the data governance piece is being addressed, right? Impact assessment. Is there customer consent issues we need to care for? Are we at risk of exposing sensitive infrastructure operational data should there is any penetration of vulnerability? And we take that sort of organic approach as well. So in these two avenues is how we're trying to slowly but surely evolve into a more structured practice around data governance.
Thanks, Herman. I am going to encourage our audience again to type up their questions in our chat. While they do that, I want to come back to the question of identifying those valuable, relevant use cases that are going to give weight and momentum to your data governance journey. Kathleen, what are some of the considerations or lessons learned you have for folks here on the phone?
In terms of identifying those use cases, things that we really look for are, use cases that have a significant impact on the business, like what use cases are really driving value for the business as a whole. That's what it really comes down to. And then, working from those to say, what do we need to have in place to enable those use cases and to fully enable the business? So when we think of the data solutions that are in place today, those have taught us some lessons learned about, what kind of data should be accessible, how should people be able to access their data. When we think of our, integrations, that's a big use case for Pemina. And, we're going down this path of doing a lot of manual work. Our master data structure, fully implemented with a full implementation of Informatica, we cut our work by a lot. So, also thinking of it in terms of where can we get efficiencies from improving our foundations so that we can get value down the road from that.
Thank you, Kathleen. Raj, anything to add?
I think it's pretty well covered, but if I have to add one or two quick points is there are multiple ways to prioritize use cases. One of the one of the way that our risk advisory used to use, at least a few years until now, was what we called risk register. The struggle is you have 100 challenges, right? How do you categorize them and align them in a certain way? You can categorize based on capabilities and then assign value and risk. That is, if you solve this problem, what value do you get? And if you don't solve this problem, what are the risks and challenges? I'm not saying it's the opposite of one another. If you improve your data lineage, the improvement is you have better data visibility, but the risk is your regulatory reports will be bad and you will be penalized. So these are not two sides of the same coin. Once you have your risks aligned and values assigned, you can automatically see how you can prioritize a use case. Which use case gives you the most value and reduces highest risk should be number one. That's one quantifiable way of prioritizing use cases. But there are other factors that come into play, such as if you have an audit coming, that becomes the highest priority use case, that kind of things, right? So it's a mix of reality versus aspiration.
Thanks for that, Raj. Kathleen Herman, we've received a question by email. I'm wondering if you can help answer to the best of your ability. Have you seen or encountered any challenges with regards to data access, security, and privacy from a cross-jurisdictional lens? Do you have experience with that?
Maybe I can start, Audrey. We operate in 14 states in the US and in New Brunswick on our regulated business. So different jurisdictions certainly sometimes have different requirements in terms of privacy and data protection, right? And I think most people on this session will be very much aware that California as a state tends to have much higher bar set than maybe other parts of the world. So as we come across those, right, we just have to make sure our approach has been that we definitely want to make sure that we get ourselves operating in the highest standard, balancing that with being pragmatic in delivering business results. And this is why we're working very much closely with our privacy team, our enterprise risk team, to really understand, okay, from a managing reputational risk standpoint, how do we best manage that? And when we encounter a challenge, I'll give you a specific example. In helping our call center operations in modifying a web form from a long scrolling one to a more smartphone UX compatible friendly design, right? One of the things that the team we did here was we tried to introduce some of the mandatory fields, and that review, privacy impact review, came back that, hey, this will work in most of our jurisdictions, but not necessarily in California at this moment in the way how this is designed. So then what we have to do is now we have a choice point. Do we completely revamp all the requirements in terms of data we require from our user across the enterprise, or do we specifically do it just for differently in California? In this particular case, just weighing the benefits of really doing that for everyone else versus just for California. At the moment, we have opted to have a special form for California, and the rest of Liberty will be using a different form. Now, that is not to say that this is going to be cast in stone, right? Like over time, we might reassess the necessity of how some of the rule changes have been in different jurisdictions, and we might shift a bit. But we really look at that on the markets that we're trying to operate and unlock values from our data assets. Do I have time, Audrey, for one more example, or what's?
Sure, let's go. And then I was hoping we could try to answer Ben Street's question on what do you do when leaders oversimplify what data governance is and what it means to drive it at scale. And Herman, I feel like with your example, you already have started answering. It's when you have cross-jurisdictional implications, that's a part of the complexity. But maybe Herman, your second example can also speak to how, if you can integrate, how you communicate the complexity and also the necessity to have probably dedicated resources that drive this forward.
Yeah, so when it comes to, we've been exploring transcription of call recordings to create more coaching opportunities for our agents, as well as having another means of creating customer loop feedback channel that we can close loop on, right? So when it comes to this, data governance, again, is front and center, because first we have to make sure that as we're doing our redaction, we're redacting the right level of sensitive information, but at the same time, we're not redacting so much that it almost become not valuable in our outputs. So I have had run-ins, and unfortunately not at Liberty, but around when senior leadership really felt that data governance is more of an afterthought. And I now leave the callers today with this, which is something I heard actually from the CDO from the US space agency, where he used the analogy of, in social media, I think on average, people spend about 2 hours a day on social media. So clearly, people have the ability to document what they do throughout the day. Now, when it comes to data governance, though, oftentimes, there's not enough budget to bake this in. There isn't time, I'm too busy, this and that. But if everyone just think about the implication of what data governance is going to do, right? And I think Raj alluded to some of it, like your data search cost is going to come down way lower. Your productivity is really going to improve because you don't have to really try to stitch data whenever there's an ad hoc questions. It's positioning that, framing those by way of productivity to the senior leadership, and also from a risk perspective, because especially in the utility vertical in the US, there have been cases where not properly protecting your data has been heavily fined, right? So it's really the availability of these different pieces of information that, hey, this is not really a data problem. This is actually a business problem that we need to make sure that we mitigate the risk. I think it's framing that, and I wouldn't want to say so strongly about education, but raising the transparency and awareness of what the implications are going to be. That's going to be key in sort of helping to overcome some of these challenges over time.
Thanks, Herman. Thanks for that. Well said. Kathleen, any closing remarks from yourself?
Sure. Around the oversimplification piece, like I will say at Pembina, we did have that challenge as well, where people would say, well, I made the data change, like it's fine, it's done. And, I took care of it in my area. And little did they realize, and I alluded to this, like the downstream effects, and trying to find some examples and working with the business to find some real examples where those downstream effects cost a lot of rework. That's money, that's unnecessary effort that probably didn't need to be done. But that helped us, I think, to drive home like a better understanding of why governance is really important and why it's important at the enterprise level as opposed to just kind of a business or service unit level.
Super, thank you. Well, thanks again, Kathleen, Herman, and Raj for joining me today to talk about data foundations. We do appreciate your time, insights, and lessons learned. Our next AI Institute event will be focused on AI in aviation on November 30th. We will talk, among other things, about digital twins and the opportunity to simulate operations and many other things using this technology. In the meantime, please do give us some feedback. we've been talking about data, and so here we want to make sure that we collect some data on your experience. With that, I'm going to wish you an excellent day, and stay tuned for more news from our AI Institute. Many thanks again, Herman, Kathleen, and Rush for being here today. Kevin, thank you for kicking us off. Have an excellent afternoon, everybody.